Hey YouTubers, it's Tony, and today I'm going to more so explain to you how to locate and remove your starter on a 2015 Honda Accord 2.4 liter motor. The reason why I'm going to more so explain it to you guys is because this starter is in an extremely tough spot. It's virtually impossible to get a camera up in there and do the job safely and successfully. So I'll give you the steps that I use to do the job, and I hope it helps you too. The first thing you want to do is disconnect the negative side battery on your car. Whenever working on any electronic component within your vehicle, it's always a good idea to disconnect the negative side battery. The next thing you want to do is you want to jack the vehicle up and place it on 2 jack stands. If you're unfamiliar with how to safely perform this process, please stop now and contact a local shop that can show you how to do so safely, or reach out to a more experienced buddy that knows how to do this. There are a couple of tools you'll need to do the job successfully, guys. You'll need a 1/4 inch ratchet and a 12mm socket. That will come in handy a little later. You'll need a 3/8 ratchet and a 14mm socket. You'll need a couple of long drivers and one short driver. You'll need a 3/8 swivel. The starter on this vehicle, guys, is located just above the front drive axle on the car. And again, it's secured by 2 14mm bolts. This bolt here, guys, is almost hidden by a longer bolt that has nothing to do with the starter. So it's almost impossible to get a socket up in there. So what you'll need to do is take a long driver and a swivel and approach it that way, and you'll be able to break that bolt loose. So one of the first things I did, guys, was here is a wire harness holder. The holder itself has a little tab on it. Just take the tab and push it up and pull it away from the holder. Move that to the side. What I did next, guys, was I broke this 14mm bolt, but I did not remove it. To access this bolt, guys, and you won't be able to see it from the ground, it's a fairly long bolt, and it will stick out of the back of the starter just like so. What I did was I took a couple of long drivers or a long driver, and I approached it from the passenger front wheel side. Just reach up in there, you'll have enough room to do so, and you'll see what I mean when you're doing the job. And I stuck my 14mm socket and that driver over into the bolt, and it allowed me to access the bolt. You'll have to use a little bit of muscle to break that bolt loose. Once you break that bolt loose, you can simply remove that bolt. I then removed this bolt here. Then what you want to do is you want to rotate the starter towards you. Disconnect this electrical connector. It has a little tab on it. Just push it down and pull it away. As you're rotating the starter towards you, guys, typically you would break this nut loose here. This is your battery lead. The wire from this runs all the way down to your battery. The manufacturer in Honda made this sort of easy, guys. It has a little protective cover. Just take your hand and pluck that off. Take your 1/4 inch ratchet and your 12mm socket. Break that bolt loose and simply pull the wiring harness up and move it to the side. Now you can safely pull out your starter. But before you do that, guys, there are a couple wires up in there. You want to make sure that there's nothing wrapped around the starter so you don't pull any wires loose and break something while you're up in there. Take your time, and you definitely need light while working up in there. It's a dark spot. So you want to compare your old starter and your new starter. They should be identical. So now you're ready to insert your new starter. One of the first things you want to do, guys, is you want to hook up your battery connection. Extremely important, guys, to hook up your battery connection first. And I'll explain to you why in a moment. So you want to make sure that's nice and tight. The reason why, guys, and then you want to put your plastic protective cover back on. The reason why you want to do this first, guys, is when the starter is sitting in its correct position, this item here will be way away from you. And there will be no room to get a ratchet up in there and do that job correctly. So you want to put this on first when the starter is in this position. Now what you want to do is put your starter in its housing. It'll be like so. You want to thread this bolt here and thread it until it's nice and tight, until the starter sort of sits in its housing by itself, like so. To get this bolt in, guys, you'll be working blindly. Remember how you took it out? That's almost how you're going to have to put it in, but you'll be working blindly. So what I did was I reached my hand up in there, guys, and I kind of guided this long bolt back into place. Then you can torque these two bolts down, but make sure the starter is sitting in its housing. Once you've torqued these two bolts down, you can reconnect your electrical connector. You want to take the wiring harness and put it back on this holder. Simply slide it back into place, and then you're pretty much done with the starter itself. While you're down here, guys, I'm going to give you a little bit of information and knowledge. If you're looking for the crank sensor on this car, this wiring harness running down runs toward your crank sensor connector. The crank sensor is secured behind a heat shield, which has two 10mm bolts. You want to remove those two 10mm bolts. Then you want to disconnect the connector. It has a tab on it. Just simply push it down and pull it away. The crank sensor is secured by one 10mm bolt. You want to break that loose. Take a pair of needle nose pliers and give this a couple wiggles until it comes out, and it should come out with no problems. Before inserting your new crank sensor, guys, you want to compare your new and old crank sensor. So if they're identical, you're now ready to install your new crank sensor. Take fresh motor oil, guys, very important, and coat the orange O-ring seal. The crank sensor sits in its own housing, and the engine gets extremely hot. So that motor oil will keep that O-ring seal protected and lubricated. Once you put the crank sensor back in, put your 10mm bolt in, guys. Torque it down nice and tight, but don't go overboard. The crank sensor is made of plastic, and if you over tighten it, you could actually crack it. Reconnect your electrical connector to the crank sensor. You want to put on your heat shield and torque down your two 10mm bolts. If you are replacing the crank sensor because your car would not start because of a bad crank sensor, you will have to reset your check engine light on the car. If you don't have a tool to do so, simply disconnect the negative side battery terminal for about 20 minutes, and that will automatically reset the check engine light. Then you're done with your crank sensor. You should be able to start your car with no problems. To the right of your starter, up above, you'll notice a black sensor. It is your knock sensor. So if you needed to locate and replace your knock sensor, it's fairly easy. You'll see it. So guys, the only thing left now is to reconnect your battery terminal, lower your car off of jack stands, and you should be able to start your car, and the car should run fine. This job is not easy, guys, by any means. If you are not truly savvy with replacing starters in tight spots, I highly recommend that you just take your starter and vehicle to a shop and have a more experienced mechanic do this job for you. If you have a friend or relative or buddy that really knows what they're doing, then you definitely want to ask for their help. So it's a doable job, guys. Tough spot. If you follow the steps that I gave you, you'll be able to do the job. Just take your time. I apologize for not being able to illustrate how I actually did the job, but I'm sure you understand that, this is a tough spot, extremely difficult to get a camera up in there and then do the job correctly. So I hope the video helps you guys. Thanks for watching and take care.